Hey Scott Brown, way up in the wild north of Scotland, far away from. Well, it's not like I'm in London. I'm in Sussex, deepest Sussex, just south of Gatwick. So, I'm definitely not in a big financial centre. Although, and we're going to talk about this a bit. I'm jumping the gun a bit. I mean, Glasgow. There's a lot of activity actually up there. You're not alone in the market data community up there.
No, no, not at all. And actually, Glasgow and Edinburgh have both made significant rises in various different indexes and rankings of financial centres. So, being Glasgow born and bred, I'm particularly passionate about the Glaswegian brethren. But certainly, the central belt of Scotland has seen a lot of growth and investment in recent times, and is still part of the broader strategy of both
Well,
industry and government
I,
to keep building on it.
I'm an Anderson, and I think my grandfather and definitely my great grandfather came from Glasgow. So I have Scottish roots. So and I'm proud of those Scottish roots. So excellent.
I'm not sure I've ever met anyone not from Scotland who has some sort of tenuous connection of
Well, we all
Scottish
know
root.
exactly. Well,
We
I
all
think
wish
if
we were
you,
Scottish.
I know, or if you're American, it's Irish, isn't it? They all want to be, from Ireland in some way. But I genuinely, I've got pictures of my two great uncles in kilts and everything.
Excellent.
So that's all good fun. All good fun. So look, I am so pleased, and of course, as we mentioned in the preamble, I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile up on the podcast. I'm also going to put a link to Barclays. Again, I presume everybody knows who Barclays is. Obviously, when I'm talking to smaller companies, it's quite useful putting their company website up there. But to keep sort of consistency, I'll put the Barclays. And again,
Perfect.
I don't know if there's a special website more pertinent that if you share a URL with me, I'll whichever URL you think is pertinent, I'll put it up there. My point being, we don't need to dwell on who Barclays is or in detail who Scott Brown is, but I would like you to just give us a bit of introduction to you and sort of where you fit in the current Barclays market data team and throw out a couple of other names of any key people that people should be aware of and blame for whatever.
Accountability. So Scott Brown, the person, studied accountancy at university. He got his module timetable for year two. It had a module called the History of Accountancy. I actually thought it was a joke and that someone had written that on a pen to at my expense. It turned out it wasn't a joke, and that was the day I learned that I didn't want to be an accountant. But I knew I still wanted to do something in the world of finance, and almost 20 years later, I've kind of stumbled into the world of market data in the last 5 years or so. Um, at Barclays, market data is part of procurement, which I think we might touch on later
Yeah.
as to where do these things all fit. Um, I work for Colin Halpin, who's the global head of market data, and then market data at Barclays is divided into three teams. So my colleague Elizabeth McKenzie looks after commercial, which essentially is all forms of contractuals with vendors and engagement with business to drive requirements for contractuals. My colleague Kim Mayer in the States looks after our change team. I would group that into three: change the business would like to do, change the vendor would like to do, or change we would like to do for ourselves, being the kind of the three. And obviously, those three can overlap at times. And then essentially, everything else is me. So technically, I'm the operations director, but effectively, it's my job to make sure the 11,500 people we have that use market data have what they need when they need it, that we've paid for it, captured it in the inventory, and manage it correctly.
So you really are the one to blame if anything doesn't quite go
More
right.
often than not. More often than
Yeah,
not.
yeah. I'll post your home number in the link as well.
No one has home phones anymore, David. That's
I
fine. I,
actually,
I couldn't tell you my home phone number.
actually, gosh, I mean, I was saying beforehand, oh, you're so young because I think I was going on about. I remember when I joined Telerate in September '84, blah de blah. To which you very politely said, "Oh, I wasn't even alive then, David." And most people aren't. So yeah, I'm showing
Yeah,
my
no, I
age.
listen. I might be slightly younger than you, but I certainly it's something we've been really passionate about at Barclays for a long time. Is early careers, and something that when I transitioned to to market data in 2020 that I've been really pushing for. So certainly when I walk about the flow with our team, I am certainly not a spring chicken myself anymore. So I can
It's
relate.
it's all relative. It's all relative. And again, that's another thing I want our conversation to go on to. There's the sort of human capital of the industry, and what we're all doing about it, what you're doing about it, what can be done about it as well. So look, let's kick off, because this has come up in a couple of my podcasts. I think definitely the one I did with Sally Hines, the one I did with John Eichel.
Yep.
And I'll sort of set the scene with an observation I've noticed is you have these market data teams. Now, the interesting question is where they report into. And again, the sort of choices I've seen, and you've just said your procurement. So procurement is one obvious sort of segment, division, whatever it's called, that people report into. Another one is quote unquote the business, somehow sort of reporting into the front office teams or whatever. Another one is ops of some sort. Quite often COOs are ultimately the sort of people that market data people report into, I sense. And then IT is another home that sometimes market data sits under. And then sometimes market data teams are split and you get a sort of commercial content team that reports into procurement, and then perhaps the sort of technology segment reports into IT. It's not always under the same umbrella. So again, I think the question is, no right and wrong to this. Well, maybe there is a right and wrong to this, but I'd be interested in your observations of how you see it working in Barclays, how that manifests itself, what that means. I mean, one final observation from me. The other dynamic is it gets swapped. Two things happen. Oh, actually, wouldn't it be better if it was in IT? And suddenly it's all over in IT. That or the top dog, the person who's the manager of it, gets changed. And suddenly that new person wants to change everything and has new ideas. There's nothing wrong with that, but I get the sense that can be quite disruptive when the sort of C-level person in charge suddenly change. Anyway, I'm throwing a few thoughts. So talk about that.
And I think the only potential home that you've missed from that list is in a chief data office type structure somewhere, where I
Yes,
think
yes.
we've seen
Yeah.
people spring up. So I think, like most things, right, there's a balance to be struck, and there's no, like you say, there's no right or wrong answer. I actually think flipping it around, not regularly, but at least on occasion, helps to drive new ideas and
Yeah.
different views. For me, it probably comes down to what's your primary purpose of the market data team, and then where's best fit to align that. So the market data strategy that we're on at the moment, which we've been on since 2022, is very heavily commercially focused. It's about identifying and working with strategic partner vendors who we can work with in the long term to develop the best solutions for our colleagues to in turn service their customers. And that structure, being in procurement, to my mind, makes a lot of sense because a lot of the heavy lift and the strategic ambitions are commercially driven. They're about trying to get from the previous deal to a new deal to other structures. I think there probably comes a point in time where that purpose then pivots. There obviously are only so many strategic partners one can have, and that you become possibly a bit more, to your point, maybe more technology focused. It's about how do we align our technology roadmaps with those respective partners. Maybe it's business focused about how do we develop and identify the best products and solutions. So I think it probably depends on best fit is probably derived by what the current purpose and strategy of your team might be. And to your point, that can change and I think maybe drives restructures over time. I've been at Barclays 15 years. The one constant, as it is for my peers in other banks, is change, right? So, we're all adept at navigating through it and all the opportunity and uncertainty that brings.
And I think you make a good point there. Change is as good as a rest. Change
Absolutely,
refreshes and changes. But if it's done too often, then it becomes seriously disruptive, is what I've seen. And I've seen this in vendor
absolutely.
firms, big vendor firms, transformation programs, all these, you get McKinsey coming in or Boston, one of these big consultancy firms, and they try to change everything, and it can cause a lot of disruption. I mean, focusing in on what you were saying there, I mean, I presume you have classic structure that I've observed is, these big vendor relationships, strategic vendor management. That seems to be a discipline that people refer to, which implies, the relationship, getting the maximum benefit of your relationship with the vendor, and then dealing with your internal customers. Is that business analysts? Is that the phrase you use, or is it?
So previously we operated with that structure. So a business management team focused on gathering requirements and working with business, and then a vendor management team focused on gathering and engaging with vendors. We collapsed both of those to a single commercial management structure so that that conversation in theory should flow more consistently. So rather that it kind of removes a layer of conversation in the game of telephone where messages get distorted and become inconsistent. But to your point, we've done it a different way. I have seen others do it a different way. I think like most structures, in particularly in large organizations like ours, it's about that communication and singular purpose. If you've got that working right, you can structure that however way you wish, as long as everyone's pulling in the same direction and is clear on what that strategy is. I think you can make any of the models work.
But if you've got this sort of commercial, you've collapsed everything, the vendor management and the business analysts into this commercial management. Does that mean that Fred, one of your colleagues, one of your, is chatting away to Bloomberg and working out things with Bloomberg, and then pops down to the floor, if you still have a dealing or trading floor or whatever, and talks to some of the users and is back and forth? Is that all in a single person, or not?
Theoretically, yes. So effectively, we're operating with pods. So we will look after particular vendor relationships and business relationships in a pod structure. So it's certainly never down to one particular person. And the idea is to try to align people to common vendors and business units. But again, for an organization like ours, we're likely to have each of the kind of 5 core divisions of Barclays quite often using the same services or similar services from the one vendor. So it's not necessarily a nice, clean, diagrammatic structure and split. But that's what we try to go for, to make sure that we're having consistent dialogue with vendors, which obviously is helpful for them to understand the products and services that we're interested in, that we want to be partnering on, and also that we take a kind of enterprise view across the firm about the products and services and the direction that we want to be going in.
And I mean, how do you find let's break those down into two separate discussions. The conversation with your internal customers, quote unquote, the business. How well do they understand market data, and how well do they understand the market data team, you guys? I mean, how does that work? How does it not work sometimes?
Yeah, no, I think like all relationships, right? They have their ups and downs. I think it probably, in an organization of our size, there are some relationships which have been developed over years. We've got people who've we have people, as I'm sure as in other places, people that move between those, who go from being a customer to being part of the team, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So in situations like that, obviously the appreciation of each other's challenges and opportunities is stronger. So there are areas of the business that we probably understand and work with and partner with better than others at the moment. We, as part of our strategy in 2022, set out this vision of being market data as a utility. So trying to procure market data
Yeah.
for everyone, and as I said, at an enterprise level. So some of those relationships are a lot newer than others. Obviously, market data traditionally viewed as being a very market-centric product and service. I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to someone in the UK corporate bank about things like buying individual customer credit rating agencies. Your Experian,
Yeah.
your Equifax, not traditionally viewed as market data, but in the structure and operating model that we have, there's no real reason why we couldn't be managing those as we do for others. So I do think one day I'd maybe like to drop that M at the front of
Well,
market data and just be a data utility.
well, and actually, you reminded me of a conversation. I mean, the phrase market data is ambiguous and confusing. When I
Incredibly.
and the way I should have done this at the upfront. The way what I mean when I say market data is all data that the markets use. Anything that somebody in the market is interested in, I would lump under the umbrella market data. Other people, and they're not wrong, it's just how they do it, they say it's, the specific data that comes from the market, like exchange data and all of that pricing data that comes from the markets, that is market data. And they're not wrong, but half the battle is making sure that you're talking the same language to somebody. And again, I think it is pertinent in terms of the scope of a market data team. I mean, you said right at the beginning, the bit that I missed was, the chief data office, which historically I've sort of understood is more on the reference data, the enterprise data management side of things, the more static database type data rather than real-time market data is what sits in the chief data office part. So again, I think our industry is riddled with ambiguities. We've got to be so careful.
Yeah. Ambiguity and evolution as well, right? It changes over time, right? As we'll both know, how market data teams and CDO teams will all structure and fit will be vastly different in 5 years to where they were today. I'd probably go as far as to say that, when I started my career, there wasn't a CDAO role that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Now we have one within each of the 5 divisions of Barclays have their own CDAO, trying to bring that consistency and structure
together. What are the 5
together.
divisions? What are the 5 divisions? I think you quirked my interest there.
So we've got the investment bank. We then have the UK corporate bank, the international corporate bank. What have I missed?
Okay, I've lumped
US
you in
cards
here.
And payments. Yeah, we'll drop that bit. I'm forgetting the 5th one.
Wealth management, buy side, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean those, and I presume the investment bank bit is a very hungry
that's
data
the
source.
big one. Yeah. Yes.
And the corporate banking less so.
So UK corporate and retail very much not a large customer base for us at this point in time. But as I said earlier, I think something that we should think about in the future as to as you said, right, where does market data begin and end?
I'm gonna show my age again. I love showing my age. I mean, obviously, I remember Barclays Capital, but I remember BZW. Have you even heard of BZW?
So
Barclays
I have, because when I first joined Barclays, the very first process that I was executing was a reconciliation of the BZW account, and when it was handed over to me, it was very much, you've got the short straw as the new guy, and that literally was my day, the entire day, trying to reconcile activity going through their main Nostro account. So yeah, Barclays has certainly evolved over the years in terms of trying to simplify. Obviously we'd bought Lehman's, etc., and obviously most recently we've obviously acquired Tesco Bank in the UK. Integration of all of that, as you know, right, is a difficult process. It takes time and effort and energy, but certainly I think our structure now is a lot simpler than going back to things like Barclays Stockbrokers, Gerard's Investment Management Limited, other things that we've kind of collapsed together over the years.
Was it BGI, Barclays Global Invest? The buy side, and I think you sold that to BlackRock, didn't you? Sell that to BlackRock?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
So you don't really have a quote unquote buy side asset management group, do you?
Not really, no.
Because you chose to duck out of that. Let me pivot slightly, but we're staying on the same topic. And this is a slightly more sensitive, so let's dance around this a little bit. Let's be nice to people. Let's not,
put my tap shoes on.
Let's not get you into any trouble. So, but I've observed that there's a sort of, where does market data sit in the hierarchy of seniority and importance? In terms of, you've got the masters of the universe who are the traders out there earning slightly more than you, Scott, I would imagine. They're in a different league, and that gives them a certain importance, a certain power. Is that the right word? Power that they have. I mean, a classic example, I don't know if it still goes on. If you want to cut costs, somebody new comes in to run your department. Well, look, just halve the number of Bloombergs we have. That's we'll save all that money, and then you try and go taking Bloombergs out of the hands of senior traders or senior managers and they would probably use fruity language to tell you what they think of that idea. And I'll add one other comment in there as well, because you talked about chief data officer. An observation I would make: I am unaware of a single chief market data officer. The highest rank I've seen in market data teams is MD. I've never seen a head of a market data department with a C title. I don't know what to read into that.
No, I would agree. I think, like a lot of conversations in life, being able to make them data driven and not emotive driven is incredibly important. Rightly or wrongly, a lot of people attach a lot of prestige to some of the products that they have, and it's
Yeah.
almost like a, having a corner office, having particular products, having particular access, having particular structures around you, maybe historically was part of a package, if you like, of someone's seniority. Um, I certainly am not in the business of challenging that. What we want to do is to be very data driven in our approach, understand what people need to do their job, and make sure that they have those tools. We want to give them options to understand where there might be cheaper alternatives. But at the end of the day, the business make the decision on all the products and tools they need. Just like
Because
for other categories of spend, right? There are various laptops, there are various mobile devices that colleagues can be given. Each line of business should be making those decisions as to what's right for them. It's our job to equip them with the right information to support that decision making process. But I would not see us as being someone who's um, dictating, I guess, decisions on the data that they require, just in the same way I wouldn't expect my colleagues doing sourcing for, you mentioned human capital, so ManCon
yeah.
outsourcing. I'd expect a procurement team to give options to the business and the business to pick the best option for what they need, inclusive of the cost consequences for them of the decision that they make.
But I suppose an adjunct. Do you occasionally fall into the difficult situation where you have responsibility but you don't have authority? In other words, hey, market, here's your budget. Cut it by 10%, and if you don't, heads will roll. But then you don't have the authority or the power to actually enforce logical decisions that you
Yeah, so
might have. I mean,
I think it's I think it's a relationship game, right? So it's very important for us not only to be working with the business, meaning the actual users of the data, but to also be working with the controls partners and the finance business partners of those areas to make sure that they all understand the consequences of these decisions which are being made. And to your point, every year we do have, like everyone else, we'll have our MTP cycle and we'll be engaged in that dialogue of budget. Our view is that we will recommend, based on all the insights that we gather, based on what we know about how the business is expected to evolve, how much money we think they will need to maintain the status quo and I guess, the known knowns. Um,
yeah.
if they choose to set a line which is below how much money we think we need, we will obviously give them options as to how they could get back to that line. But it's not certainly not a decision we would make to say, to get from
No,
here to here, you will have to do this. You will have a risk to your budget as a consequence of setting your budget effectively too low. Here are some
let
options that you have
let's
to reduce that.
let's flip to the other, because I mean we could spend the whole conversation just on this. That's the danger. All of these topics are really meaty ones. But let's flip to the other one: the vendor, strategic vendor. Well, you've got strategic vendors, and then I presume by definition you've got non-strategic vendors. And again, a phrase I've heard people is the long tail of vendors. In other words, you've got a massive amount of what you spend. I've got to keep my hands in camera in a small, and then loads of medium-sized ones, and then a massive tail of teeny-weeny ones. And how do you manage vendors? What is entailed with that? And I would throw in, can you talk as well? I want salespeople from vendors to be listening to this. I mean, advice to other vendor managers in other user firms, consumer firms, but also advice and thoughts, observations to salespeople out there. Do you ever watch on LinkedIn Jason Colaris? I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning his name, because he does. He's from Bridgewater, a hedge fund and he writes some really interesting little snippets on LinkedIn, which is basically saying, will salespeople stop doing this, this, and this, because it really really irritates me, and it just doesn't work. So yeah, throw in some anecdotes. What are the silly things that sometimes salespeople do that wind you up terribly?
I think probably the main thing that people do is fail to demonstrate transparency about what their product can do today and when it will do other things that it fails to do. I think one of the most unsuccessful conversations I've ever been involved in was someone pitching me a particular product. I had some follow-ups. I'm very process orientated. I've kind of workflows in my mind, so I was asking some questions, and we got to the point I wouldn't even finish asking the question about what the tool could do, and the answer was yes. And I'm like, I've not even asked you yet about what it can do, and you're already telling me it can do it. And I think I actually said, will it come round to my house and will it butter my toast in the morning as well? And I was like, after that point, I'm done. So I think people, and there's a fantastic book or two that you can read on this topic about that, the gap between a sales function and a product function, of if your sales function is promising things that your product team are then thinking, why did that happen? I think that's where
Yeah.
people can be really unsuccessful. So we very much pride ourselves on transparency in all of our dialogue. So we'll be very clear about what we need, and the expectation is people will be very clear on what their product can and can't do. That doesn't mean that we ever close doors on anyone if their product can't do something. We'll always be looking for an update to say, okay, if we can't do it today, what does your roadmap look like? Let's keep in touch. When we get to that point in your roadmap, let's re-engage. So, like I say, I think this is definitely a business of relationships, and I think that's where they can sour most
and
quickly,
and
is where
and
people make
trust.
promises that aren't true. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I was a salesman for 14 years, and so I've been on that side of the fence, and sales is a dirty word. I don't think it should be, because I think good sales. How do you know what's out there? How do you know what products are out there unless you've got salespeople? When I'm trying to buy something, I want somebody to sell to me. I don't want them to bamboozle me, but I want them to ask me the right questions so that they then can give me answers that are pertinent. I mean, the classic mistake salespeople is the what do you the information bomb. I'll tell you everything. The fact
Yeah.
that it's you don't need to know
I don't.
everything.
I don't want to be sold the products that you have. I want it to be explained to me what the solutions you can offer are and how they work. And I think
Yeah,
that's where people can sometimes get a little bit carried away, is talking about very conceptual conversations, when I think we should be a lot more focused on the data, as we've said a couple of times, right? We need to be very data driven of, Scott as a stakeholder needs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you deliver 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I don't need to know about 6, 7, and 8. If I want to know about them, I'll ask about them at the
yeah.
point in time. And I think that's where probably, if I had a second bit of feedback, is answer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then, if you think it's pertinent to throw in 6, 7, and 8, let's do that. But let's meet the brief first, and then let's talk about the add-ons and further opportunities. Because I appreciate, we're all being measured in our performance in a particular way. I appreciate that's how colleagues in that world are being measured, and that's okay. But I do think transparency and meeting the brief is probably the two things that we
And
struggle
and
with the most, which actually
um,
aren't particularly difficult.
and meeting the brief actually means intelligent questions. In other words, having, I mean, they always say the thing about salespeople: two ears, one mouth. Listening and trying to understand more,
I like it.
and then in relevant, providing relevant background. And I think some salespeople, and I've been guilty. You get so enthusiastic, you're so carried away, you just want to tell the person on the other side of the desk all the wonderful things. But
Yeah,
it's
and energy and passion are infectious, right? I certainly wouldn't suggest that people lose the passion for the products that they've developed, for the organizations that we work in. That's obviously important, but I think meet the brief, satisfy the ask, and then that comes after.
and I mean, how would you describe the difference in your approach, in your team's approach, to strategic vendors versus the next rung down? I mean, what do you call the next rung down? Just vendors,
So we talk about the idea of niche vendors, someone who
right?
provides a very specific thing that we
Yeah.
need, so has a USP, which we need and will continue to need, who are as important to us as strategic partner vendors. So That's probably our two primary tiers, or strategic partner vendors, who have the scale to work at the scale and complexity and pace that we work at, and then niche vendors who have a particular product or expertise which we require in order to service the businesses that we look after. So that's our second tier. We actually don't. There's obviously a scale point, right, of in terms of how much dialogue you have to have and how many products you're covering, but certainly from our perspective, they are as important as each other. And interestingly, in terms of procurement, governance, control, actually a lot of the same policy and standard will apply equally, regardless of size and scale of your vendor. There is a tiering, but a lot of the core procurement activity will apply to both groups of vendors in the same way.
Well, let me throw some thoughts at you
Uh-huh.
that I've seen over my many years. Some personally, some I've heard anecdotally from other words. You've got these strategic vendors. I mean, frankly, the big ones that you spend a lot of money with. And I throw in phrases like the devil you know. What I've seen and heard, I'll give a couple of stories and ask for your sort of thoughts on them. One is somebody was telling me, oh, we were a smallish vendor and we had a much better product at a much cheaper price. And we were going to these big customers and we were pitching this and they loved it and everything. But what they did is went to their big vendors and said, look what we can get from XYZ small vendor. It's better and it's cheaper. You better do something about this. And the big vendor says, all right, we'll add a few features and maybe we'll give you a bit of a discount. And then the customer stuck with the big vendor because it was frankly easier to do that. And the small vendor was sent running all that work, all that effort. Even though they arguably won the argument, they didn't win the battle because they were used as a club to beat the other vendor. That's one story. Hold that in your mind. The other story is a personal one I had. Don't know if I can mention company names. I won't mention. I was with a small vendor doing trying to sell a system, and you had an invitation to tender. You had all these questions you had to answer. Do you have this? Do you have that? It was a bit like some of you were mentioning earlier on. And I responded absolutely honestly because that was my style. That was how I did it. So yes, 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 yes. Oh no, but we can develop that. No, but we can develop. And there were a lot of those. No, we can. And anyway, long story short, Reuters, who I was competing with, won the deal just from me. And the customer said, David, we loved what you did. Your firm is great, you're great, everything, but you just had too many to be developed. And we just felt safer. There was a bit of safety, going with the big one. What did I do? I resigned from that company and I went and joined Reuters. Because if you can't beat them, join them. And I thought, great, I'm going to come in. This is a long time ago. So, this is 1989. So I don't think I'm breaching any. And I thought, wow, this product must be absolutely fantastic if it's got all these things. And I got there and it didn't have half of these things. I mean, basically, I'm being caught. When they'd filled in yes, it shouldn't have been yes. It should have been no to be developed. But they got away with it, So how do you play that small, up and coming, innovative vendor against the big incumbents? How do you see that playing out?
I think it applies differently in different scenarios, the complexity of what you're buying, how long you're going to need it for, who you're going to be buying it for, and where it fits into the broader ecosystem. There are definitely times where the scale of what you're buying and the complexity of it maybe warrants a larger organization. Also to bear in mind that with a lot of these companies, whilst we're managing a market data category of spend, they might also be a company of size and scale which provides you with with software, with hardware and other things, right? So I think it's a difficult question to answer in a way that really gives or offers any insight to smaller vendors. I think for us it's different scenarios apply in different ways. What I would say, and I think you used the term that they got away with it. I don't know necessarily, obviously 1989 was a couple of years ago. Um, I don't know how getting away with it would necessarily fly in terms of how we structure contracts, how we manage
So
performance,
you're
how we
probably
would go through
you're
the onboarding. That if something was
Yeah.
said to exist and it didn't exist, I would like to think that collectively that would be identified before go live, and there would be a recourse required.
Well, and again, I don't think I'm breaching any confidences here. When I was in Reuters, I'm trying to remember the phraseology. We had a process where there was stuff was in alpha in development, then it would go into beta, and then it would be RRI, ready for revenue and installation. So a product or a version would have those three. And we as salespeople, when we always had to, we were duty bound to tell a customer where the product was in those things, and we could only sign a contract and take money if something was RRI. And look, again, I don't think Reuters can sue me over this because it's actually fact, but also it's a long time ago, and they're perfect now. So this is the old days. But I think they got into trouble because people had been selling and signing up contracts for stuff that was in development, that was in beta, and they had their fingers burnt because a customer had sort of taken them to task afterwards. So I suppose I wonder if the whole world, you guys as customers, also the vendors, have just got better processes in place now than existed 20, 30 years ago. I mean, have you in the years you've been doing it, do you think
I'd like
everybody's
to think
got?
so.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that things are perfect, right? Because there's also I guess the challenge that what people articulate to be what they want sometimes doesn't turn out to be what they actually need. As I say to my children all the
Yeah.
time, wants and needs are not the same
Yeah.
thing. You might want a new jelly cat doll, but you most certainly do not need a new jelly cat doll. Um,
And I suppose that's the skill of your teams that are dealing with a bit, to really, well, or both ways, to really identify what you need and what you can afford. I suppose, bluntly speaking, there might be some things you want, maybe even things you need that you just can't afford. I mean, does that
yeah, I think,
happen?
and everything that you do, right, there has to be a valid business case to drive what you're doing, right? Barclays has got a very clear set of market committed goals in our 2026 outlook. Things which don't help us get closer to that, we shouldn't be doing. And I know, obviously, in
Yeah.
my peer organisations, they'll have similar objectives and goals and missions. So, and I guess that's part of the complexity, isn't it? Is understanding that something could be a good opportunity, and for people who are, very interested in market data as an industry that enjoy working with data, that have innovative minds, there might be things which are interesting but not necessarily commercially viable. And it's been able to take a step back sometimes and be like, okay, that seems cool, trending, on brand, something of interest, but it doesn't match the strategy. So it's not something we should pursue at the moment. And again, it's back to that dialogue about being able to link purpose.
Scott, we got to stop this one as well because we could go on forever. So I'm moving on. Let's delve into something we touched upon briefly. And I'm going to put two topics in the same category: the human capital conversation and the Scotland conversation, because I think they're linked. It's like where does the industry find, develop, recruit new talent for the market data world generally? And is that situation different, better or worse for you in Scotland, in Glasgow? What's your experience tell you with all of that?
Do you think I was actually at a presentation a few weeks ago, and there was someone from the Financial Services Skills Commission speaking at it. So this problem statement is much broader than market data. It's much broader than procurement. It's essentially, in a diminishing talent pool, how can financial services continue to compete with other industries? Believe it or
Yeah.
not, in Scotland, space tech is actually a really up and coming
Wow.
industry. So we're now
Yeah.
competing against people in that space as well as various others for talent. Um, Scotland, and part of the attraction, I guess, from a Barclays perspective about having a large campus here. So we've got around about 6,500 colleagues plus the Tesco Bank colleagues to be integrated, which takes us to probably about 7,500 colleagues here with us in Glasgow, as well as smaller sites across Scotland. As there's a number of universities in the central belt of Scotland, both Glasgow, Edinburgh, and a couple of kind of outliers within that central belt as well. It's a big destination for young talent, for young bright minds. What we've tried to do, at least in the market data team here at Barclays, is to try to tap into that more. Now, there obviously is no replacement for experience, skill set, and knowledge, but there's obviously only a limited number of colleagues across the market industry who have that knowledge. So we very much need to build from the ground up. I know FSD, obviously FISD, have their Rising Stars program, which I think probably similar aligned in the ambitions there. So we've been really pleased to welcome some higher apprentices last year. I've actually had some interns who've started with us last week, and hopefully they'll come back and join us as
And
graduates next
higher
year.
for higher for non-Scots
So
is either senior at high school or a level if you're English. Is that
so te-
18 year
so that's
olds?
correct. So yes, hires in Scotland are the same as A levels in England, but in Scotland, higher apprenticeships, also known as graduate apprenticeships. So that's where I was going to say a young person, but anyone can apply. But
Yeah.
a colleague would join the bank and will work with us usually 4 days a week, and then we'll attend university the other day a week. You can also, in some programs, they'll do it in blocks. So work on job for 6 weeks, work at university for 6 weeks. So our colleagues join us, as I say, last August. They'll be at university for 4 years whilst working in our team. I believe all of them are school leavers or
So,
near to that age.
you
So
end up with a degree and a
correct,
job and work experience.
correct.
And I think Goldman's do this, and I think JP Morgan, maybe other banks do it, but I've heard, and
Yeah,
I
no,
think it's a really
I think
good idea.
yeah, higher apprenticeships are fantastic. So my children aren't quite of that age yet, but certainly when it becomes time for them to start to think about these things, I do think higher apprenticeships is a fantastic way to get that blend of on the job experience and the academia to go with it. It's not easy,
I mean,
it is hard work, but I think it's a
no, no,
fantastic pathway for people. And like I say, not just young people that want to enter the FS
yeah.
sector. I think it's a great way to come in an entry level to build your knowledge, to build your experience, and start to work your way up the corporate ladder.
I mean, there's a segue into another sort of debate conversation. And if I throw some words at you, I think you'll get where I'm coming from. I sort of think that what you're doing in Glasgow could be referred to as nearshoring because it's not London and New York. But again, by all means, disagree with me. What I would also categorise as nearshoring, I just taught a course to Nataxis, which is a French bank, in their office in Porto. So that's what I would definitely call nearshoring, not Paris, but Porto. And then offshoring, I'm literally catching a plane tomorrow, and I'm going to Bangalore, and there's a
Oh,
whole
well travelled,
mass
David.
of I know. And there's a whole mass of HSBC, Goldman Sachs. I mean, there's Bangalore is an enormous community. There's also Hyderabad, and that is absolutely offshoring. Um, and then I don't know. In parallel to that is outsourcing, which is a different thing, which is using another company. I suppose. Again, I'm blowing their horn a bit. TRG Screen are out there making a big noise at the moment about managed services and market data as a service, which I would categorize as outsourcing. And again, my friends over at CJC have been posting a lot of stuff on LinkedIn saying, oh, onshoring is the right answer because that's where the expert. I've thrown a lot at you. I mean, what all that tangled web? What do you make of it?
So I think, and this isn't unique to market data. So previously, when
Yeah,
I was in shared service operations, I had a team locally with me in Glasgow. That was why I started at Barclays, the build out of that team, and we were servicing colleagues and functions across the globe. We then partnered with an outsource provider. We moved that to India. I was privileged to spend a lot of time in Chennai, a lovely part of the world.
yeah,
Um, we eventually then moved it to a retained organisation still in India, and eventually brought some of it back to Glasgow. Um, I don't necessarily subscribe to nearshore and offshore. We tend to talk a lot about the idea of a hub. So from a market data
yeah,
perspective, the hub of the team is in Glasgow, and then like your bicycle wheel, you've then got the spokes going out to be co-located with key stakeholders and vendors, in the US
yeah.
and London and in Asia. I think when you operate with that terminology, where your hub is becomes less important. So to your point, it could be in Glasgow, it could be in Bangalore, it could be in other places.
Yeah.
And I think if you are outsourcing, and again, I don't think this is specific to market data, but if you are outsourcing, you need to look at that outsource partner as an extension of your team if you're going to be successful. So we spend a lot of time working with the managed service providers that we use, and the other parties that make up our little ecosystem, making sure that their strategy and our strategy is aligned, and we certainly look at them as being an extension of our team. So to my mind, I personally don't have a strong view as to whether you're using retained org or outsourced org. I think it's important that globally, again, you're coming back to that same purpose and you're all pulling in the same direction. I appreciate if that's with a third party, you need to make a little bit more effort to make sure that you both understand and have the same strategy, but at the same time, the reward you can reap by having a singular purpose, I think is really quite powerful, because you then
And
get to leverage the expertise of a third party who's obviously has a broader perspective, right? Sometimes you can be a bit insular if you're only doing it with your own
yeah.
organization and you're only running your own ideas. We talk a lot about Barclays about being consistently excellent. If you only know what you're doing and think you're great at it, then you might think you're excellent, but until you go out there into the world and experience other things, I don't think you can truly say that you're excellent.
But I suppose a potential downside of either offshoring or outsourcing is an added communication link or an added couple of communication links, and messages can get diluted or misunderstood. So I suppose I'm picking up your that clear strategy. As long as you've got some overarching clear purpose, and if everybody's understanding that, that at least gives
Yeah,
you
and
some protection from.
you need to invest the time in it.
Yeah.
So within MDFM, I want to say about 18 months or so ago now, we carved out a dedicated business manager role in our function, which had been enormously successful. So no matter which way you measure it, be that engagement across colleagues, be it our employee opinion survey scores about our culture, be it our understanding of what our people need. One of the things that as leaders we sometimes mistake is we decide what people need and then we tell them that we're giving them it rather than we actually ask them and then try and pivot to work around that. So I do think, particularly to your point, in an ever global world, and we're all drowned in information communication, it's very important to have someone dedicated to managing those conversations, helping curated experience, right? Another term which probably didn't exist 10 years ago in terms of the workplace, but I think it's very important that we curate that experience for colleagues, that it's very clear to them how to tap into the information they need in order to understand that structure. Coming back to something we said earlier, about having colleagues in early careers, we're probably, we're
Yeah.
almost entering 6 generations of workforce. There will be some people who will love to watch this podcast. There will be some people who like to just watch the little snippet, 60 seconds, because their attention span is awful. There are some people who would love to read the transcript. You need to meet people and communicate with them where they want to be communicated to, which often means repeating the same things in multiple ways on multiple channels. And I think that's probably a learning I've had over my career, is don't say things in one way and then wonder why no one understood you. You need to communicate with
Yeah.
people and the mechanisms, which are ever increasing, let's be honest, right? Where they're going to
Well,
digest it
because
best.
I've got a 27-year-old daughter who's in sales, and I keep trying to import my wisdom to her.
As parents do.
And she's said, "Daddy, stop trying to do a teaching moment," and that's one phrase. And the other one is, "Daddy, it's not the same as it was in your day," which obviously it isn't. So, it's a different world. Scott, we're almost at the 50-minute mark. We talked about a lot. There's one thing I know, and I'll give you the opportunity to talk about anything as a final bit. But I think yesterday when we were doing the pre-briefing, catalogs, data catalogs, is something you're very interested in at the moment. I think focused on, and I'll preamble that with, I'm not sure I understand all this data. So first of all, what is this all about? What are the choices? What are the options? Why has this become a hot topic? Because I'm hearing it from lots of sources. So give me a bit of education on why data catalogs have suddenly popped up as a discussion in the last couple of years.
So one of the questions you had asked me earlier was about, how do you make sure that you understand the needs of the business? How did the business understand the complexities of market data? And I think, to be blunt, if you've got 11,500 users, the reality is the varying degrees of understanding of market data will go all the way in the scale from 0 to 100. So what we need to do is to try to find ways of equaling that playing field. For some people, they need market data constantly to do their role. For some people, it's a purchase order that hits their inbox from Coupa or Ariba once a year,
Yeah.
and that's their only interaction. And then, they'll ask the question, "What is this? What do we need it for? Why are my team buying it?" Um, I'm of an age where I remember being very excited about Christmas time when your mum or dad would bring you home the Argos catalogue and you'd circle some things in it because they were going to post it to Santa, I guess. I don't know how that, I don't quite remember how that lie was portrayed. Um,
Right.
but the Argos catalogue was glossy. It had pictures, it had descriptions of what you're able to buy. Certainly, if I look historically at what we had in our inventory and MDM, it was words, vernacular, commentary that you had to be an expert in market data to understand. So I think having a data catalog is an opportunity to create some consistency, to create some simplicity, and start to drive towards a world where people can navigate and find what they need.
Because an inventory management, you just mentioned MDM. From now, Calero used to be MDSL, and then there's the various ones from the TRG screen cram. So there's inventory management been around for a while.
Yep.
That is not a question. That is not a catalog, or is it? Was
So,
it a former
what
catalog that just
Yeah, I think it, like you said, right, very much described as an inventory management solution. What we want to do is to take that inventory and make that inventory into a catalog. So, everyone on this call will be familiar, and I would guarantee has bought something off of Amazon. Amazon is
yeah,
arguably the
yeah, yeah,
biggest
yeah.
and most used catalog in the world, but at its heart is essentially an inventory of products which you can buy off of Amazon. So if you think about what some of the features that exist in Amazon are, like the ability to understand what products are available, descriptions, reviews by other customers, expectations as to how quickly you'll get it, cost, cost comparators, alternative products. That's the type of things that we want to get to the point of what we have in our catalog so that people have, a bit like what we started off the call talking about, people have that optionality. They can make informed decisions for themselves. We might want to influence or help inform those decisions, but we certainly don't want to be blocking things in the catalog to say, David, you can't have that because you're not something, something, something. We want David to go into the catalog and experience David, here's the types of things someone in your role would traditionally have. Here's some other things that people in your sphere sometimes have. And here's some emerging products in this space which you might be interested in, and to give you the
So,
opportunity to explore that.
so the difference between an inventory and a catalog. An inventory is just a very simple vanilla list of stuff. And the
Yep.
catalog is that list at its heart, but then with a lot more extra information from maybe multiple sources
Yes.
that give you a lot more color about that. And interestingly, on the episode that's coming out next Tuesday, I got Ben Whittam Smith from Deontic, which is this
Yes.
rights management, the ODRL world. And I think one of the things he's working towards is to suggest that this rights management element could and should be added to the catalog. So the catalog says all these wonderful things, but then it has the rights management element there as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and I do think that's definitely a conversation of interest, right? You'd probably, I think, because I see it regularly, I've definitely mentioned on this conversation the word ecosystem.
Yeah.
Doing this well takes a number of different providers with expertise in different things, right? I know, some banks use Calero, some banks use TRG, some banks use another, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I
Yeah.
think there's um, enough complexity in what we're doing that actually partnership across that ecosystem is really important. And I include vendors in that conversation as well, right? So when I was speaking at FISD London a few months ago, we're really keen to make sure that we allow vendors to put best foot forward, in terms of being able to describe their products, but also ensuring, to the point you made earlier, as products are developed and changed, that we keep that up to date. I don't want people to be looking in our catalog and see vendor A product one, and they're like, well, actually, we've moved on to product seven now. You're six behind. So,
Yeah.
this is not an exercise in trying to squeeze anyone out. of the ecosystem. This is about allowing everyone to best represent themselves within that ecosystem with the end goal of I want my 11,000 users to have all of the best data available to inform their decision making, whatever that decision ends up being.
An adjunct to this conversation as well, something I've commented on is APIs. I think you've got all these different players, and maybe in a perfect world, they'd like to rule the world and do everything, but that isn't practical. But if each of them provide a good sort of API so that they can elegantly, efficiently talk to each other, then
Yep.
your comment about an ecosystem, you can go out and you can buy multiple products, and you would, I presume, want to be reassured that they can all talk to each other in a clever way.
Yeah, no,
I suppose.
absolutely. I think that's actually important in a couple of fields, right? So for the catalog, that integration is really important. If I'm honest, I think one of the areas we're still really behind as an industry is invoicing and provisioning of services. You know, I've got 5.5 different thousand service lines in our inventory. So many of them are permissioned by a human, emailing another human. Dear David, I've got a new joiner. He needs access to XYZ. Can you go in and do it? And you go in and you do it, and you email me back, or maybe you email me back in a couple of days' time. Oh, sorry, Scott, I'll get back to you. With the technology that exists in 2025, there's no excuse for us continuing at that scale across the industry. All of us will benefit if we can move to a more automated way of doing that, where once approval it exists within the requesting party that provision is automated. Vendor then is obviously able to recognize the revenue from the point where it's automated, not 4 or 5 days later when we all get round to emailing each other and squaring that away. There's a real need for us to all invest in that infrastructure. I appreciate the need to invest in products and develop new services, but in the back end, there's still too much cranking of wheels
I
happening
and
that I think we could really move the needle on.
Well, I think Ben Whittam Smith will owe me a beer because he made a final comment at the end of his podcast. A lot of that rights management, people talk about DRM, digital rights
Yes.
management. And again, you might be just old enough to remember DVDs. We had Region 1, Region 2, and even I
I'm
remember
not.
Microsoft Excel and stuff all had DRM in it and things like that, which has a negative connotation. And what Ben prefers as a title is ARM, automated rights
Yeah,
management, and
that's
reducing the
that's
friction. And
that's a fantastic way to think about it. And again, right, what we want to be able to do is for all of the data that we're purchasing, we want to spread it as broadly as is appropriate and authorized in order to make ourselves better informed. And as you and I both know, right now that can be an absolute labour of love of manual intensity to understand the exact specifics about who can use what and where they could use it. Um, if we could get to a point where again that was autonomous and just David joins Alpha Bank tomorrow and on day one he's given everything that Alpha Bank has that David's allowed to use for his role. Think how much better informed we would all be. Think how much quicker you would have a positive new joiner experience. Um, and then it then becomes easier to think, okay, what does David not have? What does he need? Right? Again, that use cases data driven. Say, right, okay, where are we missing the rights that we need? Um, and I think that's where, coming back to your earlier point about about talent and skill sets, whilst there's very much still a need for those experts, those SMEs, I think the digitization, if you like, of our world requires a tweak, not a change, but
yeah,
certainly a tweak in terms of
and
some of those skill sets.
and that tweak concept, again, something it's fresh in my mind because it's coming out soon. The Ben podcast. It's not binary. It's not like there's a big bang. I said something to him like, so when does the rainbow hit the pot of gold? And he said, no, it's not. It's iterative. It's a
Yeah.
progress, and we've already got benefits, and we can get more benefits, and it will gradually get better and better. We're not gonna. There's not a big bang when suddenly it's all solved. I think was the
No,
point he was
absolutely
making.
not. Right. I think like iterative incremental change is fantastic, right? And hopefully it gives our stakeholders the confidence that we're listening to them, we're trying to solve for their pain points and move forward. Big bang is, it's I guess
Yeah,
by design. It's a
doesn't.
scary, it's a scary word, right? It invokes probably some negative connotations
Have
for
you looked
some.
at the clock? Have you looked? We're at 59 minutes and 48 seconds. So I'm not going to cut us off quite yet, but I am going to now give you a chance. If there's something that you had desperately wanted to communicate in this podcast and we haven't covered, you've got a shot. Just say it. Just spit it out.
No, I think it's been a really interesting conversation, right? We've covered some good ground, and I think as we've said a couple of times, there's some topics on here we could talk about for other hours. There's probably
Yeah.
some roundtable discussions that with some various other parties would be some really fascinating conversations. I think the main thing for me, right, is the world we're operating in. It's complicated, it's intense, it's incredibly fast paced. If we can make it more data driven, if we can behave in a more transparent manner, and if we can strive for some of that automation that we've spoken about in various guises, I think that's a real enabler for everybody, no matter which part of the ecosystem you're sitting on whilst listening to this. I think we all
Yeah.
benefit from that. And it's rare in our lives, right? Or at least in our work career lives where win-win, right? To your earlier point about losing out on RFPs, right? Normally this is a winners and losers game. I think actually a lot of those behaviors and kind of purposes actually would benefit all of us.
Scott, I'm going to draw this to a happy conclusion. I think this is, I really enjoyed this. And as I was saying to you before, and I'm using this as a bit of a communication point, I'm so pleased that you, from a customer firm, have been on this podcast. It's relatively easy for me to persuade people in vendors. People have got something to sell. They're eager to be on a podcast like this. But the people on the customer side, it's harder. And I know if you work for a bank, there's a lot more scrutiny from corporate communications or whatever. We're probably going to have to jump through some hoops after this as well to
Yes.
to put their minds at rest. But again, maybe a question. I mean, I hope you believe it's valuable you communicating out. I mean, I tried to get you to say some things, to the salespeople out there and also to your peers. Again, I'm slightly self-serving here. Do you think there's value of a customer firm talking on something like this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think let me answer a different question first. Do I think there's value in everybody from all the different groups that you've described doing these sessions? Absolutely. I mentioned earlier that I've got interns. I've got them working on a little project about upskilling in the market data industry. I've got them watching all of these and upskilling themselves. So entry level, fantastic resource. I think across the ecosystem, more people being, I guess, transparent, where as far as is allowed about what we're looking for, what our strategy is, and what our ambition is. I suspect this will drive people reaching out to have particular conversations about where they are and what they're looking to do. And I think if we're all learning and growing, then it's absolutely the right thing to be doing.
Good, because I want lots more consumer firm people to come on the podcast. So your smiling face at the end here, hopefully, is a will put their minds at ease. And if anybody wants to talk to Scott, contact Scott, and hopefully Scott
Absolutely.
says this wasn't a horrible experience. So or
Not
maybe
at all,
you will.
not at
I
all.
don't know what you'll say
Not at all.
afterwards. Look, let's stop this now. I'm going to say a massive thank you and a farewell to you, but we're not going to hang up. I'm just going to press the stop record button. Scott, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Cheers.